Jason Rzucidlo reporting inside the new atrium here at Cobo Center for the 26th Annual Society of Automotive Analysts Automotive Outlook Conference. Coming up, we're going to hear remarks from Mrs. Michelle Krebs, the board president of the SAA, Joe White, global auto editor of the Wall Street Journal, and Mr. Paul Ingrassia, managing editor of Reuters News.
I think we've got a great program for you today, and this is the eve of the opening of the North American International Auto Show. I'm Michelle Krebs, this year's president of the Society of Automotive Analysts. And for those of you who are not members or are brand new members, the Society of Automotive Analysts is an organization formed more than 25 years ago to provide our automotive professional members with timely access to automotive insights and industry leaders from a wide range of perspectives, and to provide premium networking events. In simpler terms, the way we describe ourselves is we're like the group that works around hangs out at the water cooler at work, and we exchange ideas. I think that probably the younger members don't even know what a water cooler is, so say the gourmet coffee bar. We just closed the books. Oh, I'm supposed to do this, aren't I? Sorry. We just closed the books on 2013, and it was an extraordinary year. And for that, I am particularly grateful as I take over the helm of Society of Automotive Analysts. Is Anthony Pratt here? Thank you for joining us. Please give him a round of applause. He did an awesome job as president last year and left this organization in great shape. And it's, the slides aren't moving here, guys. There we go. Sorry. Anyway, we closed the books on a great year, and I give a lot of credit to Anthony and the board we had in place. The organization continually evolved into what we want it to be for the future. We had a lot of successful events that we put high-level executives and industry leaders in front of our members. We delivered on our promise of hosting premium networking experience. In January, we had the always enlightening Outlook Conference that was held here, by the way, but this area wasn't quite finished. If anyone recalls, it was a little chilly and a lot of noise, so they've done an amazing job here at the show. In March, we had a really provocative discussion about future fuels and powertrains. In May, we had the annual purchasing conference at American Axle. In September, we had the always popular Strategic Planning Summit held at Lear. And in October, we had a members-only tour of the Nissan Technical Center. In 2013, SAA's membership grew to the highest level ever. We awarded our first Thought Leader of Tomorrow Scholarship, and that was a program we did in conjunction with Northwood University. Our Young Professional Network, YPN, continued to expand. This is a group I'm really excited to work with this year, and they hosted a lot of valuable networking events. And in fact, speaking of the youth, Janelle Townsend of Oakland University, is she here? Has brought a group of her students from Oakland University to our event, and we appreciate that. We added new high-caliber members to the board of directors, but wait, there's more. In 2014, it looks like another great year, not only for the industry, which most people think will be over 16 million vehicles that we sell, and we are developing a schedule of events, a lot of which is already in place, that builds on what we did in 2013 and cranks it up a notch. We have a little business to take care of today. Here's our list of board of directors. We recently nominated 2 new members, Tom Libby of IHS Automotive. Where are you, Tom? Stand, please. Stand up. He's been actively involved with the board for some time. And especially in charge of our important sponsorship group. And Jeff Schuster of LMC Automotive, I see you way back there running in. So they have to be officially elected by the membership, so all in favor, say aye, please. Nays? Okay, you're members. Okay. Now, this is today's agenda. We're going to kick off with a discussion by journalists Joe White and Paul Ingrassia. We're going to move to an industry overview and an economist panel that will feature William Strauss of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Edmunds.com's Jessica Caldwell, and Barclays' Brian Johnson. Then we'll take a networking break, and when we return, we'll get a sneak peek at what you can expect to see on the floor of the show from, again, Detroit Free Press auto critic Mark Phelan. And finally, our keynote address will be given by Toyota's Jim Lentz. You are then welcome to hang out at the networking reception. I'm supposed to remind you there's a drink ticket in your folder. Take that with you to the reception. And relax a little before this hectic week. Before our speakers come forward, I'd like to thank all of our all-important sponsors. They make it possible for us to put on an interesting, important events like today's Outlook Conference. Too numerous to mention, but they help us throughout the year, and we couldn't do this without them. I'd also like to thank the board of directors and the committees that put together events, as well as our staff. So thank you from me especially. None of this would happen without them. And in terms of housekeeping, yes, the presentations will be available on the SAA website after the conference. We always get that question. We ask you to please fill out the survey that you will receive. We take these very seriously so that we can shape events that fit what you are looking for. And finally, I feel like I'm at the movie theater, silence your cell phones. You will also find on your table question cards. Please start filling those out, and there will be people to turn them in too. Now I'd like to bring up our first speakers. First, the ever-entertaining and always insightful Jay Ferron from Crane Communications. He's going to kind of moderate the questions and answers and the panel discussion. And then Joe White from the Wall Street Journal, Paul Ingrassia from Reuters, who will do, this is the first time on stage that first time they have ever talked about their book since it was done, 20 years ago. So it's going to be
I didn't bring my book.
Discussion. Anyway, take it away, Jay.
Would you just...
So I start? Good afternoon, everyone. Whoa, that is on.
How's everybody? We're just going to sit. You're not going to take the podium. You just want to talk to the audience.
I feel like I'm giving a sermon in a cathedral. All right. So 20 years ago, Paul Ingrassia and I published this book, and I know you can't read it, but the title is Comeback: The Fall and Rise of the American Automobile Industry. And yes, I know you're all saying the fall, the rise, the fall, the rise, the fall. But we're rising again. And so I'm just going to start off briefly and then turn it over to Paul. I just skimmed through this book after some years of not really having looked at it, and obviously 20 years after writing the material. And for those of you who don't remember, and I think most of you probably do, in 1990, 91, 92, the auto industry in Detroit went through a very severe crisis that, among other things, produced a leadership change at General Motors that was forced by the board of directors, which was then a revolutionary event in corporate America. Now I think it happens almost every other day. The other thing, which this book spent a lot of time looking at, was the realization in Detroit that there was a revolution, an industrial revolution underway in the auto industry. The lean production revolution, driven largely by Toyota, which expanded into a revolution in the auto industry, the structure of the auto industry, where you had the Japanese and ultimately the European auto manufacturers discovering that America was a really great place to build cars and trucks. And some of you may remember there was a conventional wisdom that that was not the case. Turns out it's a great place to build cars and trucks. And so the conclusion of the book was that the Detroit automakers in the early 1990s realized that they had to undertake fundamental change to survive. We took an optimistic view that they were going to start reckoning with their real problems and change and get better and be competitive for the long term. And I'll just sort of quickly go through some of where I think we got it right and maybe where we got it wrong, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul for his take, because he's actually gone back into this material much more recently in a book than I have. I hope we can talk about this, but one of the things that's interesting is that right now we are at a really crucial point again for the industry. I mean, you could probably, and some people have, write another book that looks at these issues of what does it take for these large organizations to revitalize themselves and succeed. Looking back, there's a couple things we missed in the early 1990s. Pretty obviously, we didn't recognize how profound the problems between the car companies and the United Auto Workers were. They didn't get that sorted out until 2008, 2009, unfortunately. We didn't see, or I think appreciate fully, the importance of trucks and SUVs to the recovery of the industry in the 1990s, profits in the 2000s, and I would say after a period in which Washington has once again tried to focus the industry's attention to small cars, we're back again to a point where trucks and SUVs are going to drive the recovery in this business. And then the final thing that I'd point out, from my perspective, is, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look at something you wrote 20 years ago and say, well, okay, but it's humbling. The final thing I would say before I turn it over to Paul is, in 1992, 3, 4, when we were working on this book, the idea that China would be the largest car market and be the linchpin for future success for the automakers in this country, in Detroit, was completely off the radar. We should have had an idea, but we didn't have any idea. And that globalization, that next level of globalization, is going to be critical going forward, I think. So with that, that's my preamble. I'll turn it over to Paul.
Well, thanks, Joe, and good to be up here with you and with Jay, and great to be here with all of you. As Joe said, 1994 was 20 years ago, was the year we published Comeback. It's also the year that I left Detroit as a resident, although I've been coming back regularly ever since. So I now live and work in my role with Reuters as managing editor. I live and work in London, and I'm trying my best to learn the local language. If I was in London, I would say I'm very chuffed to be here with you, and chuffed is a good thing. Just want to make that clear. It means I'm pleased or I'm delighted in the lingo of London, if you will. In reviewing the book that Joe and I published 20 years ago, I mean, the most obvious disconnect is that, first of all, the comeback failed. It failed spectacularly just 5 years ago this year in the bankruptcies of General Motors and Chrysler, and in the near bankruptcy, but the fortunate escape of Ford. We warned that this, in the book, we did warn at the end of the book that, hey, this could all go awry, but frankly, as Joe says, we really put the emphasis on the positive at that time. We actually believed that Detroit's two near-death experiences, both in the early 80s, if you'll remember, and in the early 90s, would have been enough to teach some very sobering lessons, not only to the managements, by the way, but to the UAW. And it turned out that two near-death experiences, guess what, were not enough. Which raises basically the question, will the near-death experience of 2009 be enough to prevent anything like this ever happening?
Wasn't it a death and a resurrection this time?
It was a death and resurrection, that's right. That's a better way of saying it. Thanks, Jay. Everybody needs a good editor, by the way. Look, one of the things that's remarkable about this industry that, we're all attached to in some way or another is, to me, just the remarkable parallels, what I consider the parallels with the Old Testament of the Bible. It's a theme as old as literature, as old as humanity. The companies do very well for a while. They're on the straight and narrow path. They sort of get full of flush with their own success. And then they go a little astray, they start worshiping a golden calf or two, and then it's time to repent again, and the whole cycle, you know, repeats itself. So,
hey, can I just add that if you look at the history of the industry, those cycles actually do take place roughly in 7-year increments. Think about it. I don't think it's that far off.
So it's a sobering thought, and I think it's a thought that the more that people in this industry, in this town, think about it, actually the less likely it is to occur again. So it's best to be mindful of that. A lot has changed since 2009, since the death and resurrection. One of the things that has changed, I think, is the cultures of these companies. Yet it's really unclear just how fundamentally that has changed. One thing that has not changed, by the way, guess what? We at Reuters did a story about this. Paul Leinert, our bureau chief here, did a story about this 2 months ago, that the Detroit 3 companies still generate between 2/3 and 3/4 of their global profits from the sales of pickup trucks and SUVs in North America. That has not changed. And guess what? I am betting that Vice President Biden does not mention that fact when he comes here to the show this week, okay? Because it's a politically inconvenient truth for the administration to acknowledge. You know, a couple other things, just, you know, looking forward now as opposed to backwards toward that book. Obviously, we're in as Joe said, it's a critical year of transition, including leadership transitions. You know, Mary Barra is taking over as CEO of General Motors. In a year's time, we'll have a new CEO at Ford, most likely Mark Fields. Sergio Marchionne has said he will depart Chrysler Fiat Chrysler in 2015. And people say, well, what are the new leaders going to be like? And the truth is, none of us really knows until they take over. It's just too hard to predict. In terms of technology, we obviously have a continuing search for what's the next alternative powertrain. I can safely predict, I think, another year of bitter disappointment for all electric cars. They're not making it, and they're just not going to make it. I think that hybrids obviously are making it. It's remarkable that, you know, 2004 will be a decade since the Prius was introduced in America, and I guess the second generation was introduced in 2004, right? Excuse me. Toyota still has more than 50% of world hybrid volume worldwide, in hybrid vehicle volume worldwide. It's really remarkable. It's a well-known and well-established technology, and for one company to keep that market share is pretty remarkable.
Innovation. It's no longer a print-to-spec industry. It's what do you have as your best ideas, correct?
Well, yeah, that's right. I have the privilege of sort of covering this as it happens. You're right. I mean, the factory floor is still really important, but I don't think it's going to be as important as managing technology under the skin of the car. You know, what's going on in terms of connectivity, what's going on in terms of powertrain. I somewhat disagree with Paul, about fuel economy.
Not for the first time.
Not for the first time. Fuel economy is going to be an issue for the automakers and the government. I think people are not going to feel as compelled to buy high-efficiency cars. I mean, you can see it in the latest sales numbers. But the demands from policymakers globally to get the fleet to something like 55 miles a gallon, or double what it is right now in the United States, that's going to persist. And so you're going to see a lot of effort, and the revolution is going to, and the competitive arena is going to be around who can do best in choosing the right technologies to respond to that.
But Joe, what you just said implies that governments and automakers are not responsive to the will of the people.
Well, there's tension around that. The automakers are responding to the will of the people. More than half the vehicles sold in the United States were trucks last time.
What I also heard is, you know, 20 years ago, this was, manufacturing was king.
Yes.
Now sitting by that throne is the government. the government is affecting a lot of what's going on by measurement, by fiat,
yes.
and we may be heading into more government when you start thinking of the connected vehicle.
Yes.
I mean, if you like privacy, you're not an internet fan, but you're probably worried about the NSA, and the NSA, since this is wireless,
or you're worried
listening to everything you say. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, Paul is right. I think a lot of this stuff is going to be litigated, quite literally, not just in the marketplace, but in a courtroom. And I think that that's a different arena than the one we were writing about. I mean, look, and I mentioned this to somebody, I think it was Jessica. When we wrote this book, Al Gore hadn't invented the internet, or at least not really. There certainly wasn't, you know, I mean, we're not probably going to have time to talk about this, but retailing, there was no internet to pressure car dealers. There was no Tesla selling vehicles direct to the customer. That whole arena, which is now in play, wasn't in play then. It's going to be in play.
So is the customer driving the industry now more than they did 20 years ago?
Well, the customer is one factor.
A bigger factor or lesser?
Oh, I think in some ways lesser, because the government is trying to be more assertive, to be honest with you. I'm not sure that's good, by the way, but the government is trying to be more assertive. And I think as more and more the connected car comes into, you know, into popularity, that will be partly driven by the consumer, but also partly driven by lawyers and judges. I mean, just think about this. So the first time you have a driverless car on the road and it gets in a crack up, okay, and someone sadly is injured and maybe a paraplegic for life or whatever, so who gets sued? Is it going to be the driver of the car? Well, wait a minute, it's a driverless car. Will it be the OEM who made that car? Will it be the company that made the software that supplied the OEM? Will it be all of the above?
As a lawyer, I'll say yes to all.
All the above, yes, right.
Well, look, there's a reason why Google hired the former deputy administrator of NHTSA to be one of their senior leaders in their autonomous vehicle.
Right.
You know, it's not because Ron Medford is a very capable fellow. I don't know that he's a software engineer per se, but he does understand regulation pretty profoundly. So that's, you know, that tells you something.
But going back to 20 years ago to now, another big issue, hasn't the cadence of the industry accelerated? I mean, isn't technology even faster than lawyers?
Well, I do think the more that the auto industry interacts with the digital technology industry, the faster the clock will become.
I mean, they're like the barbarians at the gate. I mean, here's CES has become more automotive, and automotive is becoming more CES.
Because it's kind of a weird relationship, right? They don't really like each other, but they need each other. I mean, those are giant platforms for people's time and attention. That's what Silicon Valley needs. You spend 70 some hours a month in a car.
The electronic control unit of a Tesla is a game chip.
Yeah,
a game chip.
Right.
Stop and think about it.
So that's different from when we wrote this.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge, big difference where the competitive arena is going to be in the next 10.
So are we overemphasizing styling when we walk around the show and look at the 600 models and underestimating what's going on in the powertrains, the turbos, the telemetry?
Well, I don't think we're overemphasizing styling. I think styling is always going to be a huge factor. In fact, I mean, to be blunt about it, I think if anything, you know, there's a dearth of really styling innovation, frankly, that you've seen in recent years. Hopefully, that's beginning to turn. But you know, a lot of cars out there look alike, I'm afraid.
They do look alike. Is that because they're all becoming B and C class? Or sport utility,
compact sport utility vehicles. Top Gear, my favorite show in all the world, did an absolutely hilarious segment. I can't remember when they did it because I DVR'd it, and who knows when it ran. But they lined up about a dozen compact sport utility vehicles that are sold in the UK, and they had lots of fun with the fact that they couldn't tell them apart. So yes, that's a problem. But I would say, look, Steve Jobs, to get an example from the digital industry, Steve Jobs taught us, I think, that aesthetics and taste matter in a product, and so I do think that styling matters because you can have, look, a lot of the connectivity is going to be a commodity. You're going to either have it or you're not going to be on the shopping list. So you have to differentiate, and aesthetics are still going to be part of that. The sizzle's still going to matter.
Yep. Over the span of 20 years, we got questions from the audience. Oh, I'm supposed to hold up a card and say, if you have a question, you can write it down. But if you also have a question right now, I think we have a microphone. So take it there. While you're doing that, give me, over the 20 years, what was the star vehicle for the industry globally? What industry defined the trends that you foresaw?
Boy. I mean, it depends on how you want to answer that. I mean, in a way, I would say, you know, and this will sound weird, but the Ford Explorer, when it took 4 doors in the 1990s and launched the SUV revolution, that's one. I mean, not the most stylish, but it's one. Paul?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the SUV, broadly speaking, the Explorer, a big part of that, but also you can't forget the, you know, the Cherokee and Lee Iacocca's vision when he bought American Motors. Remember American Motors fondly? Maybe not.
Was there an individual who was a star that you didn't foresee in that book?
Didn't foresee.
Or did foresee,
yeah.
that you said this is the person who can define the next 20 years.
That's I mean, no doubt. I mean, that's
well, I think the guy I would say is Mr. Yuichi Yamada, now the chairman of Toyota, but the guy the father of the Prius. I mean, what a remarkable thing he did. You know, he was basically, his career was caught in middle management limbo. He was an NVH engineer. If you would have polled the engineers at Toyota and said, which one of you and your ranks is going to be chosen to develop this revolutionary next generation vehicle, Uchi Yamada-san would have been number 10,000 on the list. But they plucked him out of nowhere and he did it. That's what makes this industry such a great story.
Yeah. Question?
Yeah, Joe, when you and I were talking about the presentation today last week, it dawned on us that the turnaround came with the big three when they finally had 3 outside CEOs running these companies for the first time. To what degree do we attribute the success of these turnarounds to those outsiders?
Well, I think each of those situations is different, and not to get bogged down in that. I think what they have in common is you know, a willingness at the top to take risks and try different solutions, and to say just because we've always done it this way, we're not going to keep doing it this way. But each of the succession of CEOs at GM and Alan Mulally at Ford, Sergio Marchionne at Chrysler. And let me just focus on Alan Mulally at Ford. He brought a fresh perspective on how to manage the company, obviously, but he also had going for him the fact that the company was in a do-or-die situation. So there wasn't a lot of time for argument. And I don't know for sure, but I'm going to bet that he made that point more than once as he was, you know, pushing through his program. The question, and I think Paul alluded to this earlier, you know, pretty directly, is, you know, as the Ford culture, the GM culture, the Chrysler culture go forward, 2-3 years from now, when, if the analysts are right, we're back up to 16+ million vehicles a year and trucks are selling like crazy and there's money everywhere, when somebody says, look, we've got to go one direction on this and we've all got to pull it together, do you think somebody will say, you know what, why don't we just try it this other way? Or let's start another brand. Let's see how that works. Because heck, we've got the money, and that's where the risk lies. We haven't mentioned supplier consolidation, a big issue over the last 20 years. From thousands, hundreds of thousands in the tier 4s. Now the tiers are sort of muddied and there's a lot less, and they're bigger. Big impact or not?
Huge impact, I think, Jay, on the structure of the industry. I mean, basically, you know, the kind of, and look, it was sort of inevitable as technology advanced and you needed more capital to stay in that game. I mean, you know, the kind of stuff where you're just sort of stamping out parts and making a good living, you know, as a supplier, just really couldn't really, you know, continue in an age where car companies are demanding far more sophisticated technology, the expertise, the cost of developing that is a sort of a shared thing now, and it's actually, I think, it's been good for suppliers. It's been good for the OEMs, and it's only going to continue, to be honest with you, especially as we get into alternative, you know, technology cars. Just think about you know, who's going to make the hydrogen fuel cell chargers and all that sort of thing? Well, it's not going to be, you know, Ford and Toyota that's going to make that. It's going to be a supplier company.
No, I think that's right. I think you're seeing that one of the consequences of, you know, basically 20 years of boom and bust is that the big automakers, you know, I mean, GM used to have a gigantic research arm. You know, they had the Bell Labs kind of thing going on with it, and they don't have that anymore. They got research, but not like they used to. And so managing innovation and managing the difference in clock speed between a car company, which has products every 4 or 5 years, and digital technology companies that have products every 6 to 12 months, and getting those to sync is going to be a big challenge going forward. But
if you were going to write another book right now, and the first chapter was what should keep CEOs of auto companies awake at night, what's the abstract answer for that?
I want him to go first on that one.
You know, I think the rapid changes in technology, and basically, Jay, the fact that people don't really quite know where it's going in terms of either propulsion technology or consumer electronics inside the car. How do you manage that? How do you harness that? How do you stay abreast of it? But how do you not get so far ahead of it that you make bad mistakes that it's hard to recover from? So I think it's the rapid technological revolution.